Chuka is the leading Remain voice in the Labour Party, a brilliant spokesman for our cause and for reason in politics. He is currently, I'm right in thinking, the chair of the all-party parliamentary group, and you inspired and lead with maybe Anna Soubry the grassroots coordinating group. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
Now, what you won't know, this Remain groups are coming together, and they're all down the road in Millbank, which has very good ley lines, if anyone knows 1997 history in the Labour Party there. And we've all come together, and I'm organising something, and Chuka is the inspiration for all this. And the first question I wanted to ask him was, are we coming together too late? Have we got time to change this? Have we got time to reverse and change public opinion?
We absolutely have got time to change the trajectory that we seemingly were on in the aftermath of that 2016 referendum. And let's be absolutely clear, there is no legal or political impediment to Britain taking a view that is different at the end of this year when it's presented with the Brexit deal that the Prime Minister comes back with. We have had ministers basically lie in the House of Commons about this, and the Brexit Minister, Lord Callanan, suggested that legally there was a reason we would not be able to revoke Article 50 in the House of Lords, and he was forced to come back not once but twice to correct the record in the House of Lords, which is unprecedented. And it's absolutely clear when I speak to the heads of government and foreign ministers of other member states of the EU 27 that if we wish to take a different view on seeing what Brexit actually looks like, then we are free to do so, and they won't stand in the way of us doing that. So this is not inevitable, folks. There is nothing inevitable about this at all, in my view.
I touched on polling now. I've seen some private polling which says that, yes, there is a change. There is a Remain majority. It also says that people will consider a vote, but they don't like it to be called a referendum, a vote on the deal or lack of it. But then and they also think the NHS will be irreparably damaged by Brexit. These things are all established in the public mind, but what they're not yet persuaded of is that the economy will be damaged and trade, that we can't just trade anywhere we like and be more successful than we currently are. Those two things are a sticking point in the polls and not moving at all. What do we do to persuade people?
Well, I think, the truth is, we're all very engaged by this entire debate. And one of the things that infuriates me is the way in which sometimes in my own party, people question your motives for adopting the position that you do. Unfortunately, there are some people in the Labour Party who cannot see beyond any issue refracting around whether you are a big fan or you're maybe not such a big fan of the leader. And frankly, I don't care about the leader in this scenario other than my party doing the right thing, because this is actually about my family. You know, I'm a quarter Irish. I was celebrating St. Patrick's Day and watching the rugby with most of the Irish part of my family over the weekend. I have a French aunt. I have a Danish niece and nephew and brother-in-law. I have Spanish relatives. I am European as well as British. And, fundamentally, this goes to what my family is. And my French aunt Marina was saying to me on Saturday, she is still heartbroken by all of this. And actually, my family is very typical of so many of the other families in my constituency. And so that is what this is about. But of course, not everybody is touched in the same way. And the reality is, from the polling and focus group research, is a lot of people are just fed up of this thing.
That's right.
They're like, just why can't you politicians get on and do this? Like, I'm fed up with it. But I do think when you look at the research, there are a number of things that jump out. First of all, this is taking far longer than anybody thought it would do. It is impacting on issues that nobody thought it would impact on, whether you voted Leave or Remain. How on earth does this end up how on earth does the press conference that's ongoing at the moment between Michel Barnier and David Davis, how on earth is this Brexit press conference kind of revolving around the Good Friday Agreement? I mean, people are like, how does Brexit impact on that? And then the transportation of, isotopes used for cancer research. I mean, what is Euratom? So all this stuff is coming to people and they're like, I had no idea that it was going to impact in this way. And then, of course, there are a lot of things that people thought would be the case, but now, in fact, are not the reality. So the idea that, look, the Italians want to sell us Prosecco, the French brie and wine, and, I like my food, and the Germans cars, and as a result of that, they're going to give us all of the benefits of being members of the club whilst being outside of the club. People see, well, actually, just think about it logically. Of course, they're not going to do that for us. So I think increasingly there are more and more new facts that are emerging. And it's not even a question, I don't think it helps if we say, look, you guys, you're all lied to and misled by the Daily Mail and the Sun, because I think that's quite patronising. But actually, it's just the reality of the situation is very different. And that is why people are very open to there being a people's vote on this deal. Because 2016 is actually the past now. We're now in 2018, and this thing is very, very different to what people thought it might be, and it's going to impact in a way that most people didn't foresee. And that's what gets people to the point where they go, actually, yes, I don't think an elite in Westminster should determine the future of my family and the young people in my family in particular. Actually, I think not 650 people, but 65 million people should be involved in this decision. And, this is why I say to many people who are part of the movement in the room, going around saying stop Brexit is not a political strategy for getting to where we want to get to. We have got to have the conversation with our fellow citizens about, in the end, this is a democracy. And if you're making huge decisions, and in particular, if there cannot be agreement in Westminster, I very much doubt there will be around this deal, is actually about you getting the vote on this deal. That is the route to getting to where we all want to get to. But shouting in ever louder terms, stop Brexit, all the research tells us that doesn't work. Or saying you were lied to and giving the impression you were too stupid to understand what was happening, that doesn't get us to the promised land either. We have to make this a matter of democracy, because it is a matter of democracy as far as I'm concerned.
Just on the detail, I think it's really important. It's a very hard year to predict. It's very difficult to know how. I mean, I often try and game it out myself or model it out, and it's very difficult to know what's going. What do you think? So we've probably got until Christmas, or maybe it's not that long. What do you think the key moments, and how do you think it's all going to pan out? What is your game? What do you think the game will be?
Well, first of all, to prevail, you have to amass your army.
Right.
And we have to be ruthless, we have to be far better coordinated, and we need, if we can, to avoid duplication. Now, going into this battle, we're in a far better place than we were in 2016. In 2016, we were going into that with essentially one organisation, which didn't really, at that point anyway, have a big grassroots network. We have around 10 national organisations now. The biggest is Open Britain. It has huge followership. Mm-hmm. Over 500,000 people are following it in some way, shape or form. And then you have others like Scientists for EU, Healthier In, with their 250,000 people, the European Movement and the Britain for Europe groups with their vast network of grassroots activists who do much of the, the door-to-door stuff. We didn't have that in 2016. So we now have that, and we need to mobilise it, and we are mobilising it. And it is all much more coordinated. So I basically bring all the groups together every week and chair the grassroots coordinating group, which doesn't seek to dictate to anybody what to do, but more to make sure that we're not cutting across each other. And if somebody's doing an intervention or a action, then we can clear the decks and give big prominence to that if necessary. And we bring together the campaign outside Parliament with the one in Parliament through the All-Party Parliamentary Group on EU Relations, which Anna Soubry and I chair. Now that gives us a massive advantage over the kind of rump of where the the pro-Brexit forces are located, which is basically in and around this, I call them the economic ruin group in the Conservative Party, and UKIP. That is where they're located, but they don't have anything like the network that we have. They don't have, everyday people on the ground making this argument in their communities. So the starting point for how this pans out is mobilising that network and these organisations we have to actually win this battle. And how it will pan out is, you've got the twin track of the EU's process and our process. Now, the EU guys get, particularly in the wake of the vote that we won for giving Parliament a meaningful vote on the deal, everybody in Brussels, on the Council, on the Commission, and amongst in other capitals, was like, actually, something's going on here. They all thought this was a done deal. It's going to happen. These Brits, it's kind of a really, they can't make up their minds what they want, their cabinet, Whereas now, there's a real sense that actually, because of the arithmetic coming out of that general election, and it's a hung Parliament, Parliament is the one which is in the driving seat of this. It isn't the executive. Arguably, it's not either of the front benches of any of the main parties. Parliament is really asserting itself in a way it hasn't done in decades. And they understand that in Brussels, and they understand that their process is not going to fit neatly with a rather chaotic process on this side, where we will have major votes on the customs and trade bills we predict around the time of the local elections, just after that.
And then later on in October?
So the first stage will be the votes on the customs and trade bill.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there will be votes on the European withdrawal bill. So that all comes to a head around the second, third week of May.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't think certainly on the customs union the government have a majority in the House of Commons. And then obviously in the autumn, towards the end of October and November, we will get to vote on the deal if the deal has been finalised by that point.
Right. So will there be a vote if there is no deal?
Dominic Grieve's amendment provides for Parliament to vote on the UK's withdrawal arrangements. So we cover all of the scenarios.
Right. Okay.
Whereas what the government wanted is just a binary: you accept Theresa May's deal or you crash out with no deal. And we said that is ridiculous and we won't put up with that.
Right. I want to move on to, I've got a big question at the end, which people can start thinking about. Is the time we're living in now, which I think strikes me as the most interesting time. But first of all, I want to talk about this country. Many foreigners want to work out whether to live here or not. And it seems to me that it has become really deeply more polarised since the referendum. In every way, generational, between regions, between town and city, between goodness knows races. How can this be healed? Do you think it is likely to be healed anytime soon?
So, on the one hand, we are not as polarised as people think. So I made a point because, my constituency scored the highest Remain vote in the country, say for Gibraltar, as part of the UK, and Lambeth got the highest Remain vote in the country. Just to underline that point, we're very proud of that. But I made a particular point of going and spending a lot of time in constituencies that scored the highest Leave votes. So I went and spent a whole day in Boston and Skegness, and I spent quite a lot of time with their MP, meeting different people in that area. And of course, it's been kind of described as anti-immigrant central of the UK. Now, what I found there was not a bunch of racists and people who have an inherent dislike of immigrants. I found a town which had seen a 420% increase, or 400+% increase in immigration over 12 years, and it hadn't been given any support to deal with that in any way, shape or form. And actually, the commonality between, say, Lambeth and Boston Skegness was that they had the same challenges in terms of jobs, rates of pay, a dysfunctional housing market and the rest. But they thought that leaving the European Union would solve all those problems. But the commonality was that we had the same problems. So in that sense, the divisions aren't as big as you think. But on the other hand, you do see it play out in terms of the difference, the generations, how they voted, the different demographies of the country, how London, say, voted compared to other parts of the country. And I think that is just a feature. It is a feature of globalisation, actually.
Right.
This division, and I'm afraid. I think what we're potentially going through is a complete realignment in the way that politics actually works.
Yes.
And I don't think it is just a straight left-right split in terms of how people see the world. I think there are different things which determine how people behave and vote and their attitudes, which are coming to the fore and we're seeing more clearly.
One of the things that strikes me is that you thought at the referendum, everyone would stand still, accept the result. But what has happened is that people have become much more hardened in their views and much more extreme and much more opposed. Now, despite what you say, I think there has been in some people, and perhaps many, a psychological change. They've just been changed by the experience. And I think that may be true of the country. What I'm leading up to saying is, can we go back to June 2016? Or do we, if we get some good news on remaining in the EU, do we then work out as a country how we go forward? We're not going back to how we were, so we need to move forward. And that's the point of people like you.
Look, I completely agree with that. And I think, look, on the way up in the lift, and I won't name the person, but they were lovely and helped me find my way to this room. They just said, actually, at the moment, that they have been in the country for 35 years. They weren't born here, and they're angry and almost hate what our country is now. And what I would say is, like, don't. And be careful not to draw big conclusions from what has happened, because otherwise you fall into the trap that Theresa May did, where she drew big conclusions from what happened in that referendum and gave a disgusting speech to her party conference in the September of 2016, where she talked about, basically, she talked as if 16 million people were some liberal metropolitan elite, citizens of nowhere,
yes,
rootless people,
so great,
and was talking as if she was actually talking about a small number of
yes, people,
and forgot that actually she was talking about half the country who rejected that characterisation and stereotype of a huge mass of people. I mean, how dare you call my constituents in Lambeth some elite? You know, we are one of the most deprived, we're one of the most deprived local authority areas in England. We have some of the most extreme social problems. We do not have a bunch of people who are all the beneficiaries of globalisation. They're often the people who've been hit by it hardest. The point is, we didn't believe that leaving the European Union would solve all those problems. And here's the thing, for all of us, we are not arguing, you know, those of us who believe we need to stay in the European Union, we are not arguing that to maintain the status quo. We are arguing that because it provides the best chance of changing the system to better deliver for people in this country. So it is, I want us to stay in to change the world. And given that these forces that are knocking people left, right and centre operate across borders, how are you going to do that if you're not working with other countries cross-border to make that happen? That's the argument for me.
Good argument. Now, I just want to go to this point. I don't know if there are one or two people as old as me in the room who probably remember 68. 68, you won't remember this, Chuka.
I came into the world 10 years later.
Well, I do remember it because I was an adolescent, and there was this great sense of change in the world. You could see it on TV, Grosvenor Square demonstrations. Paris was in flames, across Europe was in flames, every university had a sit-in, and America, of course, was in flames too. Now, I am very struck by what's going on today. It seems to me that we have got governments which are actually paralysed by populism. Those have been elected in populist surges are paralysed, so that there's not much going on in government. We can agree that in both the United States and the United Kingdom. And yet, and it's pretty grim, really, the lack of good behaviour among politicians in power. And yet, underneath this, you've got the Me Too movement. You've got, I think it's called, Equal Pay movement, Black Lives Matter movement. You've got the kids whose colleagues were shot down in Florida, demonstrating, but also being incredibly articulate. So there's this enlightened movement going on at the same time as a rather oppressive, narrow, defensive movement at the top. What do you think's going on?
Well, I think what's going on is that we've got this thing called globalization, and it is creating levels of insecurity, uncertainty, and change that is really hard to get your head round, and is even harder to live with when you're trying to bring up a young family. I've got a young family myself. And so with that change is not just come economic change, but the demographies of our countries in the Western world, in the advanced economies, has changed as well. And the system simply isn't delivering for middle and lower income families. And we know, looking at the 1930s, that when that happens, there is certain sentiments that arise and certain dangers that present themselves if we don't deal with how people feel about a system and make that system better work for people. And so that for me is the real challenge, is if we want to heal the divisions and kind of detoxify the environment, you've got to get that system to better deliver for people. And, look, I'm a social democrat, I'm a social market person. I don't believe, having a world where your entire being is controlled by the state and run out of the treasury is really the route to happiness and freedom. But equally, we've seen where, the opposite, where you allow market forces to run riot, gets you. Look at the global financial crash. So the challenge is, how do you craft a new settlement that actually, using the power of the state and the individual markets actually delivers better for more people more of the time. And too much of the system is rigged. And we've got to make sure that it is wired to deliver for more people. And unfortunately, 140 character solutions, which you can tweet out in black and white terms, don't work. No. They sound good, but they don't actually reduce poverty and inequality and spread opportunity. And in a very complex world, those kind of black and white solutions are very seductive. But the truth is that the things that will really get us to where we need to be, I think, are quite grey. They're not terribly sexy. They sound technocratic, but actually they can deliver.
Can you? We've got to go, or we've got to stop. But I wanted to ask you. It strikes me I couldn't do your job. It strikes me because you have to be an optimist to do it. Yet at the same time, to do it well, you have to be a realist. And these are very difficult things to balance in life. And I wonder where you stand now. Are you optimistic? I mean, I mentioned all these movements, what I regard as enlightened upwelling of very good and wonderful things about humanity. But then we have got some grim stuff to do. Where are you? Are you still optimistic?
I'm always an optimist. Maybe that's because I'm progressive. But look, the way I see it is that in every person, particularly in UK, we're quite, we don't have multiple republics. We've always been quite evolutionary until recently, some might say. But in the end, there are two parts of everybody's personality when faced with all this change. One is essentially fearful, hesitant, anxious, and that can unleash some dark forces in us. But the other is hopeful and optimistic. And if you just take the immigration matter, and I don't know if you remember, I think it was last year or the year before, when there was that awful picture of the child washed up on the shore, the refugee child. And there was an outpouring of emotion about that picture and the journey of that child. And that is an outpouring of emotion in the same people who are often seen and feel hesitant about immigration, assisting refugees, and the number of people we admit. That for me crystallized those two parts to the character of this country often. And our challenge and our mission must be to activate the optimistic, progressive part of every person's being that can see the opportunities and can see that if we work together instead of othering each other, that's the solution. And the evidence of that is the general election last year.
Yes.
Because we all thought, God, how on earth are we going to be able to change the trajectory of this country? And in that general election last year, that fearful, hesitant part of the British psyche was put front and centre of Theresa May's election campaign. And the British people looked at it and went, nah, that's not for us. That's not what we're about. And that's why I think you should be hopeful and optimistic as we look at the next few months ahead. This is going to be an incredibly difficult challenge we're trying to achieve. But in the end, it's in our hands to make this happen. So let's do it and let's make history. That's my message to all of you.
All luck to you. Thank you very much. Chuka Umunna, thank you very much.